All right. Well, we had our outdoor service last week, which was great. Really appreciated the extra fellowship and connection outdoors. Wonderful. The rain swept over and the night before, and we were able to enjoy a great picnic afterwards. So that was fantastic. Next week, because Walker family has made plans for a little bit of a getaway, Dewey is going to be the one that's going to be sharing next week. We'll be back, but Dewey, because I didn't want to be thinking about, I don't exactly know how this is going to pan out. So in terms of when we're going to leave or when we're not going to leave or, He doesn't even know where we're going. Exactly. I don't either. I have no idea what's going on. We're still trying to make it up as we go. It's complicated. Jackie, by the way, we have your Tupperware dish in our van. I got to try to remember. Oh, maybe we brought it in. Yeah. You can use that as a seat thing to higher up. What's the bench or whatever? What's the thing that little kids use to like booster? Yeah, booster seat. Yeah. Okay, just didn't want to forget that. So next week, Dewey's going to be sharing, and then the week after that is Mother's Day. And I thought for Mother's Day, we could just do something unique this year. Maybe an interview, in an interview fashion, I could kind of interview a panel of 3 mothers, just on a few questions and just have them answer some questions. And I thought that would be a really unique way of kind of sharing from a mother's perspective on Mother's Day what they have learned, more about God, how they've been stretched to grow more like Jesus as a result of motherhood. So that's what I'm kind of thinking 2 weeks from now. Eventually, we are going to get into Malachi. I want to preach verse by verse through Malachi. Got about 8 messages. I'm preparing for that. That's going to be at the end of May, early June, into the summer. So I'm in a unique position, and I just figured I would address a interesting topic today, just because it's a singular message. And I'll give you the background behind this. So let me give you 2 slides. So anybody see this in the news recently? This is a news article that says, when will the U.S. hit the debt ceiling and what happens if the country defaults? We've been through this before, Do you remember years ago when Congress couldn't decide and it went beyond, and then didn't they shut down certain, like the national parks were starting to get shut down, and they were threatening that Social Security wouldn't go out to people? And all right, so Tim and I have been talking about this, or he's been sending me a couple articles, financial articles, and this is going to make big news because I think, is it Janet Yellen, that's the Treasury Secretary, and she said, hey, I can keep things going until early June, so you got 5 more weeks. If you guys don't figure this out in 5 weeks, then, bad things are going to start happening. So I think we're going to see more and more conflict over the course of this next month as Congress and the president try to decide what to do about raising our debt ceiling. So now I'm going to put this up. I know it's so small. I'm just taking screenshots of websites, but this is a website called usdebtclock.org, and you'll see at the very top left, it calculates in real time. So all these numbers, they're all changing. We're almost about $32 trillion in debt as a country, okay? So my objective today, I'll try to give you a big picture. I want to spend some time, I'll spend half the time just giving you a big picture perspective of where we're at as a nation. And then I want to bring it down to you as an individual. And the theme of today's message is a healthy financial house. What do we do in light of the big picture of what's going on? How do we, can we tweak things in our own life so that we can ensure a healthier, more stable financial position for our personal, marriages, homes, and individual lives? And one of the inspirational pieces that kind of led me to go this route this morning, I listened to a pretty short clip, maybe it's 15 minutes or so, is by Dave Ramsey. He's a Christian finance guy. And the title of this video, which I can send out via email, or you can type it into Google or YouTube and find it. 5 simple steps for building wealth. 5 simple steps to building wealth. And I laid those out. And we're going to go through those today. right? Look at some relevant scriptures. So we're at almost $32 trillion of national debt. We've got this debt ceiling crisis that's going to be more and more in the news over the course of the next month or 5-6 weeks. And I would expect more conflict. Who knows? It could go even into the summer. This is a chart of our national debt. So it took us 160 years to hit $6 trillion in debt in 2001. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, pretty much we've run a deficit. We've spent more than our revenue, our income, by about $1 trillion a year. So now we're approaching 32 trillion, and you can see by the chart, the curve is beginning to be pretty exponential. And I personally don't think it's going to stop. I don't think there's no reversing this. I think it's going to get a lot worse. Last year, the U.S. deficit was 1.38 trillion. We had record revenue of almost $5 trillion, but our spending was 6.27. So to put that in household terms, if you made $49,000, you spent $62,000, which means you went into debt by $13,000 on the year. And our government is doing that year after year. It's not just our government. This is a symptom that is probably prevalent within the American population as well, which I'm going to get to here in a moment. So already this year, this is coming from fiscaldata.treasury.gov. So this is like an official source. It's calculating in real time. Just this year, in the first 6 months of this year, we have overspent by $1.1 trillion. We're already in the hole by $1.1 trillion in the first 6 months of this year alone. All right. So we have a big problem. Now, the U.S. federal government tax revenue, 2000 it was 2 trillion, 2005 2.1, 2.16, 10 years later. Now, here's where it really began to exponentially increase. We're bringing in double what we were bringing in 10 years ago, and yet we're still overspending money as a government. Now, I'm going to tell you why this is bad, because the Bible has a lot to say about debt, all right? And we're going to get into that. But I just want to give you a big picture of kind of the trajectory we've been at in terms of revenue. Taxes are increasing, the government's getting a lot more money than it used to, and yet we're still overspending. And of course, interest payments. So this is from the Congressional Budget Office. I told you this is a unique message. I like facts and figures. I'm giving you a big picture before we narrow it down for you as an individual and what Scripture has to say. But interest rates have been artificially low for years, right? And that benefits anybody who has debt. Benefits the government, benefits anybody who wants to, let's say, buy a house at 3% compared with 6 or 7% today. So interest payments on our national debt, $3.71 billion, 3.9, it's been increasing. And this year it's projected to be $640 billion. Now, our defense budget is about $800. So that's about 80% of our defense budget is just going to interest to pay back loans on purchases we didn't have the money for, so we had to borrow. And this is what's fun. $640 billion of interest that we're paying back this year, extra money that we're throwing away, is equivalent to the top 8 defense budgets of the next 8 countries: China, Russia, Britain, France, etc. All right? So we're throwing interest money away that's equivalent to the top 8 defense budgets of the other highest countries in the world. Crazy to think about. And it's only going to get exponentially worse. Now, again, this is coming from the government itself, not an independent agency, but this is their projection. And you'll see Fox Business ran an article the other day. 10 years from now, our interest payments on the national debt are projected to reach $1.4 trillion annually. So what happens is, once you have a debt that's so great and your interest, you get to the point where you can't get out. The hole is so deep, it's mathematically impossible to get out. And we're going to see interest payments on our debt becoming more and more a percentage of the overall revenue pie. And that means less money. Can you imagine, if I went back, I don't know what I remember calculating this week because I like numbers. If you took $640 billion of extra money and you just divided it among, I think there's like 125 million taxpayers in America, it's like $5,000, all right, per taxpayer. So maybe $10,000 for a household, $5,000. That money could probably be better spent in other ways, and yet we've overspent in the past, and now we're paying the penalty for it. So 70% of Americans are under financial stress. 44% do not have an emergency, or $1,000 saved away for an emergency expense. 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. The average credit card debt, $5,800. The average credit card debt per household is about $10,000. So this is not just a symptom that we see in our government as a whole, but this is also being played out in individual American households as well. Another enemy that we have is inflation. So if inflation was calculated the way it was calculated back in 1990, it'd be well over 10%. Now, they kind of manipulate things to make it look a little bit, or they don't use the same products or the same methods, calculations as they did years ago, make it look a little bit better. But our government continues to print tens of billions of dollars. You know, the banks that fail, they have to make that money. It's coming from somewhere. They're printing tens of billions of dollars, okay, a month to pay for expenditures. And the average household income is about $75,000. Inflation is 6%. The government's secret tax inflation on U.S. households this year is about, let's say, $4,500. So not only is the government increasing taxes on you, but they can't do it too much because you'll rebel. You know, we get angry when we see tax. So what they do is very secret. There's a secret tax. They can tax you two different ways. By actually raising taxes, which is happening because our revenue in the last 10 years has doubled, more taxes. But the secret tax is just inflation. If they print money, it takes wealth from you. The value of your dollars decreases the more dollars there are, okay? So this year alone, your purchasing power is going to decrease, this is just an average, by $4,500. They're taking that money. They're taxing you with that money, okay? I hope you realize that. All right. And that's assuming, of course, that if your employer gives you a 6% pay raise and the inflation's at 6%, then it's even. But generally speaking, your employer is not going to give you a raise at the same level as the inflation rate. Okay, so you're going to be losing money. Now, here's a good example. I think that's Raina from a long time ago. So she looks so cute. So I took that picture. January 1st, 2020. All right. Corn, and we supplement our chickens. We give them one handful in the morning. Now, 3 years later, look what the price of corn is. Same bag. That's a 76% increase in 3 years. That's 25% inflation a year for corn. All right, that's 25%. Now, that's just a personal example from our life. All right. Now, we can look at countries with high levels of inflation. We know what happens to countries, what happens to populations when we do the research, when we do the history. Two G20 countries, Argentina and Turkey, have the highest inflation rates out of those 20 countries. 98% in Argentina. Everything doubles every year. Okay? And 60% in Turkey, just in 1 year. All right? Now, Zimbabwe, I knew a guy in college from Zimbabwe, and he's like, he showed me a $10 trillion bill. And he's like, this can only buy you like a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe. All right? Because inflation rate was so high, they had to do $1 trillion bills, and that was just for common everyday. That was like equivalent to like our $5 bill. All right? So when we look at countries who have gone through this before, it doesn't turn out well. It puts a tremendous hardship upon the people. The wealth is evaporated. And I believe that we are heading in this direction. It's getting worse and worse because of our spending, because of our debt, because of our deficits. And even though there may be some politicians who recognize this, as a whole, there's no incentive for politicians to make hard decisions. And really, a lot of us have been addicted to the lifestyle that we have become used to. So it's really not an incentive for us. It's easier to kick the can down the road. And when we do that, I think it's going to be a lot worse for the younger generations or our kids. All right. So I believe, based upon the mathematics of the situation, and I've looked at some really good economists on this, we're past the point of no return. It cannot be fixed. High deficits are going to continue. High inflation will continue. The national debt will exponentially increase. It's impossible to pay it back. Interest payments on debt will consume more and more of the revenue. Our financial system will eventually collapse. And I listen to people that manage billions of dollars. They're the top of the top, and it's inevitable. It's going to happen. What that looks like is a different story. Nobody really knows. The world is looking for an alternative world reserve currency. You may have heard there's an alliance. BRICS refers to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So as America uses the dollar to weaponize against countries they don't like, to put sanctions on countries they don't like, and as we inflate the money supply, countries that hold our debt, like China, say, why would I hold paper money that's being inflated by the American government and it's losing its value to the tune of millions or tens of millions of dollars a year? I would rather invest in gold or oil or something, some other commodity that's going to retain its value. So countries are looking to come up with an alternative system than the dollar. And one of perhaps the alliance that's doing that the most is this BRICS alliance. And they're recruiting dozens and dozens of countries around the world to join their alliance rather than the United States. So G7 nations, the Western alliance is like less than a billion people. The BRICS is already 3.3 billion and growing very fast. So as the world's reserve currency in the dollar begins to decrease because of our fiscal policies, there's somebody that's going to take its place. And the fear, of course, maybe you guys have seen this in the news, the de-dollarization of I don't know if you guys, I don't have cable, but so there's a lot of fear about what's happening to our economic system in America. And then eventually, who sent me this recently? David, you probably we've talked about this before. CBDC, central bank digital currency. When our system collapses, all the central governments of the world, there's like 140 nations that are already working on this. They're working on a monetary system that's totally electronic. So every dollar, there's no more paper. Every dollar has a number. They know exactly where it goes at all times. It's kind of like using cryptocurrency technology. It can be programmed. It can be controlled. The fear is that just like China, when the government, and you're getting this right from the government, you don't get this from the banks. The government is controlled. They can control what you do with your money. They can see everything that goes on. They can put it into the system. Oh, you've spent too much gas in your commute to work. We're going to limit you at $400. So the fear is when our current system collapses, what's going to come next, and is what is going to come next going to be more controlling and more advantageous for the government, or is it going to be beneficial for us? And how might that come about? So that's kind of in the midst. And I would say probably in the next 5 years, we'll probably see a rollout of a new 5-10 years. We'll see a rollout of a new system. That's just my personal opinion. All right, 3 options for the United States: cut spending, they're not willing to do; raise taxes, which we're seeing continuously; or print money, which is probably the easiest political option. Is to inflate the money supply to pay for their bad purchases and their debt. All right. Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28, God comes to the people and he's like, hey, if you want to be blessed as a nation, just listen to my voice. Just listen to these principles. Listen to my laws. Obey my rules. Obey my laws. I know what's best. I'm a good father. It's kind of like with my kids. As a father, I love my children. I want what's best for them. If they would just listen to their parents, you know how easy a child's life would be? How many mistakes, consequences that they would avoid in their life? And yet the people of Israel refused to do that. So he's warning them in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Blessings for obedience, curse for disobedience. And based upon that passage, our current problems are self-inflicted. We like to point the finger and blame others like China, etc. But a majority of our problems are self-inflicted. Our country's financial condition is a sign of a much deeper issue. It's a heart issue. there's plenty of examples, as I said, of other countries who've made this mistake and had to deal with the terrible consequences that God warned about would come if you didn't listen. I think difficult times are ahead, and we need to storm-proof our financial house now. So that's the first half, okay? That's the introduction, just to get you to circle the wagons, get everybody on the same page. Now, let's personalize this and just look at your situation based upon Dave Ramsey's 5 simple steps for wealth creation, okay? And here they are. I listed them in your bulletin if you want to take notes. I can give you that website, or you can look that at. But it was really simple. It was maybe 9 minutes, 15 minutes. Pretty simple YouTube video, 5 simple steps for building wealth. Have a written plan. Get out and stay out of debt. Live on less than you make. Save and invest for retirement, and be outrageously generous. Now, based on the statistics, remember, 70% of people are under financial stress. 44% don't have it. So let's just look at this room, okay? I know for certain that these principles, that we can learn from these principles, okay? I don't know what each of your financial situation is, but I know that the things that we're talking about today are relevant for each one of us. It's a very practical message. We're not getting into depth in terms of the scriptures today, but it's still very practical and very meaningful for us. And my ultimate application question is at the very end is, how can we implement in our own lives some of these financial principles that might position us in a healthier place as individuals, as families, as couples, so that we're prepared for what is to come? Because I think what is to come as a nation, things are going to get worse. Things are going to get harder. Just looking at the math, emotions aside. All right. So number 1, having a written plan for your money, aka a budget. No one accidentally succeeds at anything. If you want to build wealth, here's the word that all of you guys hate. You have to be intentional. You have to plan. Have to be intentional, right? Intentionality. They did a study of millionaires. They found that 93% of millionaires are intentional with their money. They budget and they stick according to their budget. That's why they're able to gain wealth. All right, every dollar, you've got to give every dollar an assignment and then stick to the plan. Now, I want you to turn in your Bible to Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Matthew 6:24. Because this is like the key verse that really stood out to me all this week. Matthew 6:24. I want to put it up on the screen, but I also want to see it. I want you to see it in your version as well. Matthew 6:24. Jesus has something pretty significant to say about money. Okay? You follow along in your version. I'll put this up on the screen here. All right. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So my question this week, and I thought about this in a different way, what if we imagined debt or money as a demonic spirit? Okay? If we think of it as a spirit, a demonic spirit, or debt especially as an enemy spirit, the question that really came to my mind as I was studying and thinking about this week is, who is in control? Either you will manage money, or that money will manage you. Either you will make money serve you. You give every dollar an assignment, and you stick to that assignment, you stick to that budget. Or if you're just led by emotions, you let money control you. You serve money, or does money serve you? Does that make sense? One of the hardest things, I think, for all of us is self-discipline. It's self-control. Especially when it comes to spending money. I think probably everybody in this room, myself included, have purchased things that afterwards are like, dang it, why did I, just because we made maybe an emotional decision in the moment that we wound up regretting afterwards, okay? So how do we make wise decisions, and how do we have a written plan for our money? How do we have a budget? How do we stick to that budget? And I think what's being communicated here in Matthew chapter 6 is, and we'll get more of this, maybe I should just click the slide here to debt, number 2, because it really plays out under this concept of debt. Money can consume our thinking if we are in a bad financial position. It can consume us. In fact, I'd be willing to bet those who are in a bad financial position probably think about money more than they think about God. And I think that breaks God's heart. I mean, I really feel like that puts their relationship with Him in jeopardy. And if you think about money or debt, again, as a demonic entity, sometimes money can become our idol because we think about it. We have to think about it. We have to think about it for survival. So when we get into debt, when we purchase things that we can't afford and that we don't have money in savings for, the consequences of that usually leads to a sizable amount of our income being reallocated toward interest. And the result is you end up with less money to save and invest for your future. Now, let me give you a practical example here. So Dave Ramsey says, in order to build wealth, you've got to get out of debt. That's got to be a priority for every believer. Every Christian's got to get out of debt because debt will make you a slave. Buying a car at $50,000. Now, a car is a depreciating asset. Once you drive it off the lot, it's worth less every year, right? It's not like a house. A house might be an appreciating asset. That might be in a different category. But most of the things we go into debt for depreciate in value. You don't have the money to buy the car at $50,000, so you take out a loan for 5 years at 6.5% interest or whatever it is. And you wind up over the 5 years paying an extra $10,000 of interest. So Doug, who is responsible with his money, he saves up until he has the $50,000. He buys the vehicle for $50,000. But Patrick, who's irresponsible or doesn't have the money, I go to the bank. The bank says, "Oh, we'd love to loan you that money." Yes, certainly. But you're going to have to pay us back more. And I'm not thinking in the moment, so I say, okay. And 5 years down the road, how much did I pay for the car? I paid $60,000. Doug paid $50,000. I paid $60,000. I wasted $10,000 of my money because I didn't have it in the moment. All right? So debt really is slavery. Look at this verse. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. The borrower is a slave to the lender. So debt leads to a loss of freedom. It's stressful. It's frustrating. It can make you feel hopeless. You can feel the weight of it on your shoulders when you're in a bad financial position. And it never gives you a break. People can feel trapped, enslaved. It holds you back from truly living out God's purpose and plan. There are many times that I have thought about wanting to give, having an opportunity to make a positive impact. But then my mind goes back to, oh, well, okay, how much do I have for this? Can I afford to do this? Imagine if you had plenty of money. You could make such an amazing difference in the world with so many opportunities to be a generous person wherever you go. Everybody, all of us love being generous for the right causes, for the right reasons. It's a good feeling. It's a great feeling. But we can't live out God's purposes and plan if we're not wise with them and we're not, out of debt. All right. When you have debt, you're living paycheck to paycheck, or you don't know how you're going to pay the next month electric bill. Money becomes your idol because you have to think about it all the time. Debt forces you to focus more on money than on God. It can consume your life. It can become a god. I believe it is satanic. It's God doesn't want any of His children to be in debt. It's a trap. It's a master that is difficult to get free from. Once you get into debt, you have chains on you. It's a master. It's a spirit. It's a burden. It's a pit, and it's hard to get out. So one of the big things that Dave Ramsey always counsels believers who call into his show to do is to get debt free, to get out and stay out of debt. Until then, you will be enslaved to your creditor, your past mistakes, and you could say the spirit of mammon, the spirit of money. Here's 2 quotes by him. God does not want us to be careless with our money. On the contrary, He wants us to handle our money His way so that it doesn't have to consume so much of our time, energy, and thoughts. It's so much easier to serve God rather than money when we live below our means, pay tithe, and live debt-free, because it's one less thing we have to worry about in our already busy lives. Now, I have no idea why it must have messed this up here. Can you imagine, I know that maybe some of you fall in this category, and if you do, bless you. This is amazing. This is awesome. Can you imagine if you had no payments? No payments. Can you imagine the freedom of that? Oh, okay. Yes. I mean, it's freedom. It really speaks of freedom. You feel, there's nothing on you. You just, we need to decide not to borrow anymore. We just need to make that decision. Like all of us need to make the decision as believers not to go into debt anymore. No unnecessary purchases. We need to learn how to deny ourselves, deny our flesh. The kids, my dad taught me this a lot earlier on. I mean, we never went out to eat. I mean, we never went to McDonald's. I just had to learn contentment. I had to learn contentment with what I had growing up. My dad was very frugal. When he made a purchase, he always bought the best of the best, but he rarely, it was a long time in between. And that's just how I kind of learned growing up, to take pleasure in saving and not spending. Since I've had kids in the house and things break, it's a constant hole. The house something's always going wrong, so it's a little hard, but we need to learn. We need to have the self-fortitude, the self-discipline to not make no more unnecessary purchases, to really focus on saving. Jesus came to set us free, and slavery, here's what's so unique. It's a paradox. Okay, the world says, come to me and you will have freedom. Just do whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want to do it, and you'll have freedom. That's freedom. And what happens? It's a trick, and it brings slavery. Here's what Jesus says. Come to me and be my slave. Submit to me, and you will have true freedom. It's an amazing paradox. The world says, hey, you want to have freedom? Come to me. Reject you. Just come to me and do whatever you want, and that's freedom. And then you become a slave. Jesus says, come to me as my slave, and you will experience true freedom. So I truly believe when we follow Jesus came to set us free. When we follow his principles, when we follow his word, we will experience freedom. And back to the Deuteronomy, I have two passages here. In the beginning, he said, when you listen to me and you obey, you're going to lend and you will not borrow. You'll be the head and not the tail. You'll always be at the top. I should read this one. If you pay attention to my commands, the commands of the Lord your God that I give you today, and carefully follow them. You got to obey, not just listen. You got to put them into practice. You got to obey. You will always be at the top and never at the bottom. Then he warns, later on in the chapter, he says, if you don't listen, others are going to rise up higher than you. You're going to sink lower. They're going to lend to you. You're going to borrow. And they're going to be the head and you're going to be the tail. So where do you want to be? At the bottom or the top? Simply about following God's word, God's commands, God's principles. Now, number 3, live on less than you make. Live on less than you make. Here's Proverbs 21:20. So I saw this verse for the first time in a unique way that you skip over those Proverbs unless you really meditate on it. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil. So think about this. In the house of the wise, you walk in and you can see the savings. You can see the stores of value in the house of the wise. But if you walk into the house of the foolish man devours all he has. Which means the foolish person consumes all of their revenue, all of their income on a monthly basis. They don't save. They don't save up. The wise person lives on less than they make. They're able to save. And with what is coming as a nation, I think we need to learn to live on 90%, 80%, 70% of our income. The story of Joseph in the Old Testament is a story where God predicted there's going to be 7 years of prosperity and then 7 years of famine. And Joseph, as a wise individual, he followed this principle. During the 7 years of prosperity, he said, we've got to store up, we've got to save in order to be prepared for what's to come. I've looked at the math as a nation. and what is to come is not good. I don't think there's any way to reverse it. I still pray for our country. I pray for our politicians. I pray that there would be hope. But I'm just looking at the math, and numbers don't lie. We're beyond repair. And I think what's coming is going to lead Americans down the hole toward poverty and difficulty. What can we do now? We need to not make the same mistake that the government's making. We need to learn to live on less than we make every month. 90, 80, 70%. Because then if something bad happens, and you're already used to living on 80%, and something bad happens, you can still maintain. You're still secure. All right. Where can I cut expenses in various areas of my life? Sometimes the kids complain. Whenever we go out to eat, if it's $100 to go out to eat as a Walker family, I can do the same meal in the home for $30, for a third the price. So very rarely is it beneficial for us as a family to go out. It's just too expensive. We can't afford it. It's not the wise. Every once in a while we'll do it, but it's not the wisest course of action. Electric bill, I just put down. Sometimes in the summertime, instead of setting the air conditioning at 70 degrees, the kids complain. It's like, it's kind of hot in here because every degree higher saves us a little bit of. So we try to find that balance. Like, hey, turn your fan on. You'll be okay. That will cool things down a little bit. So what's that balance between comfort but not spending too much, not going overboard? How do we differentiate between needs and desires? I was talking to Kirk about this week. A lot of times we desire something, we just go ahead with the purchase, but it's not something we really need. How can we learn to live with a spirit of contentment, as I said? If your lawnmower breaks down, you need a new lawnmower to mow your yard, right? But my yard drives me crazy. There's so many holes and divots, and the chickens get in there. But to do a good treatment for your yard, it's expensive. Is that absolutely necessary? Now, if I have plenty of money, maybe I can afford to do $1,000 for a lawn treatment. But is that a need, or is that a luxury? Is that a desire? All right, number 4, save and invest. Save and invest for retirement. Develop an emergency savings fund is what he recommends. Maybe half your yearly income. That would be ideal. That'd be great. Invest 15% a year toward retirement. I remember back in 2008, some of my uncle in particular, when the stock market dropped in 2008, retirement accounts, maybe there was somebody in this room that felt this, but I remember him specifically so worried because his retirement account lost 30% of its value in a relatively short period of time. So investments are risky. Yeah, that's the nature of it. I think over time, if you diversify and you're patient, you'll get through the long-term ups and downs. At least that's what they always, your investment strategists or financial advisors are always going to say. But I think we're hitting territory we've never seen in the history of this country. Because of the debt, because of the deficits, because of inflation, we can't base the future based upon the past. I think diversity is important. One verse that came to mind in Genesis chapter 13, I read this week. Abram became very wealthy, and look how God defined his wealth. Livestock, which reproduces for you, right? Livestock, it's physical, it's tangible. You can eat it, Livestock, silver and gold. So I was just thinking about tangible assets this week and intangible assets and diversity. What would that look like if we were to live below our means? We don't, we save a little bit each month. And how would we invest that? How would we invest that savings? We got to do due diligence on our end to exercise wisdom in that area, okay? And last one is be outrageously generous. And I love the fact that he put that down as one of the 5 major steps to building wealth. How do you build wealth? By being generous. That's a very interesting thing that he would recognize. And let me read this quote to you. At the end of the day, true financial peace is having the freedom to live and give like no one else. When you write a plan for your money, get rid of debt, live on less than you make, and start investing for the future, you can be as generous as you want to be and help change the world around you. When you make giving a part of your life, it doesn't just change those around you, it changes you. Studies have shown over and over again that generosity leads to more happiness, contentment, and a better quality of life. And I would agree. Generosity is a spirit that changes everything around you. And God has some very specific promises in Scripture regarding this. It says, God loves a cheerful giver. God is a giver. He's generous. He wants us to be like Him. He's our Father. He loves to give. He wants His children to be just like Him. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will reap generously. God will observe your life, and by the principles you operate, He will give you what you ask for. He'll return to you what you are. If you are a generous person, He will respond with generosity. If you're stingy and you're not going to get it. So the more I have found in my life, the more that I have sought to honor God with the wealth that He has given, the more that God has said, wow, I can really trust Debbie, or I can really trust Scott, or, I can really trust Pat. She's a good steward with the resources that I'm going to give her more. And then you're able to be even more generous and more helpful. And He's like, wow, she's not selfish at all. I'm going to give her even more. So when we're faithful to honor God with our possessions and our wealth as good stewards, He delights to meet all of our needs. God is able to bless you abundantly. He is able to do it so that in all things and in all times, having all that you need, you can abound in every good work. God wants us to do good things with the resources He's given us. We can't do good things if we don't have the money, if we don't have the resources. So He wants us to live generously so He can be generous to us. And when He's generous to us, He wants us to use that as good stewards to be a blessing to others. All right? Last slide. Well, I got the application slide, but last verse, okay? Proverbs 3. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be... if you honor the Lord with your wealth, and you give Him the best, you give Him the first. Now, we always think about that in terms of the tithe. And every, once or twice a year, I'll mention tithing. The tithe boxes are there. We don't really draw attention to it during the service. I think it's very important for believers. Tithe is a good basis. 10% is a good basis. I would argue in the New Testament, we go above the Old Testament law, which is 10% plus more. So we support, Chris and I, we tithe. We want to support above and beyond that. We support about 10 different ministries as a family. We want to honor the Lord with our wealth, with the first fruits of our crops. If you do that, God says, then your barns will be filled to overflowing, your vats will brim over with new wine. And I know a number of people over the years that I've been friends with, even in this church, said, okay, we want to make the decision, we're going to give God the first 10% of our income each month. It's going to be hard, it's going to be a stretch, it's going to be an act of faith. But those who have done that, I really haven't heard of anyone ever stepping out to tithe saying, oh my gosh, I wish I would have never done that, and they go back. They always say, you wouldn't believe how God showed up in an unexpected way, and I got this, and my employer gave me a raise, and this, my tax return was bigger than I expected, or whatever it may be. God is faithful to provide and to meet our needs if we will honor Him. And I hear the same testimony from every person who doesn't tithe, who doesn't honor God with the first fruits and with the wealth, and it's, I just don't have enough money. I can't tithe. I can't give. I got to pay my bills. I never have enough. So I hear the same testimony from those who tithe. I've got more than enough. God is faithful. He is good. He takes care of me. And from those who don't put God first with their wealth and honor Him, it's, I never have enough. I'm struggling. I'll never be able to get to the point where I can live with the generosity that I desire. So take that for what it is. But God wants to bless us. He wants to bless us for the purpose of us advancing His kingdom and making a difference in this world for Him, for His glory. It's not about us. He's not going to give me more so I can go buy a boat and the second vacation house. And, it's not about that. That's not where my heart is anyway. My heart is, I want to make a difference for Him. I want to make a positive difference for Him and for His kingdom. And finally, I should say, let's close out with this right here. Blessed are those who find wisdom, who gain understanding, For she is more profitable than silver and yields better results than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. You know what I think of when I think of wisdom? I can put a big J-E-S-U-S there. Because where did wisdom come from? The source, I would say Jesus. Jesus is the source of all wisdom. So if wisdom is more precious than wealth, we should be pursuing Jesus first. Jesus is the priority. And through Jesus and through his principles and through his word, as we obey, as we seek to honor him, as we seek to obey and follow him, I know that his blessing and favor will come upon his people. So, big overview. Here's the application question. What would the implementation of some of these principles look like in your own life? If we truly are headed in the direction that is projected, okay, that I've just made a simple argument for you to consider, okay, you may disagree, but a simple argument for you to consider. What would that look like if it was true? What would it look like in your life if you were going to reevaluate your finances and say, okay, how do I prepare for what's coming? Can we cut back expenses? Can we save more? How do we live more generously? Are we honoring God with our wealth? What would that look like in your life? That's the takeaway. Okay? Any thoughts, comments before I call Miss Carolyn up to close us out? We'll sing maybe the chorus of that third song. I know what's your initial reaction, thought? You disagree with me? We're better than, I don't know. I don't know what media sources you guys watch. What's your takeaway?
Have you given any thought to how it affects us as a church? Because we're planning maybe some big expenditures. Does that figure in somehow?
I probably could or should, yes. I don't have a specific answer for you right now, but that's a good insight to bring up. Sorry, it's a little humid in here, right? Do you feel that? Or maybe it's just me talking so much that I get...
But what we're thinking about is buying an asset that should increase in value.
Perhaps, yeah. And the one thing that almost every financial advisor that I've looked at says, I mean, universally, says, when you buy a home, it's an investment. Because it's going to increase in value. So that is a type of debt that it would still be good not to have any kind of, payments on a monthly basis. And I long for the day when you can pay that off and, But that's probably the one type of debt that might be beneficial, if you could label it that way, because it's a rising asset.
As financial chairman of another denomination, a wise banker told us that money spent on capital improvement, capital investment, is money well spent over all the other money is spent.
And you could put education in that too. I mean, there's some sorts of debt that might, as a necessity, if you go back to school to get certain education, that might lead to a better job. And you could rationalize it because of the long-term profit in that initial expense. But by and large, think about credit card debt. You think about maybe even auto loans, and just how do we eliminate debt from our lives so that we can live with freedom and we can live as generous people? Any final? Oh, Kirk.
So, it was a little over a year ago, we kind of stepped out in that faith of doing the, is it Ben? Okay, stepping out in faith and doing the 10% tithing. It's, in my personal experience, I found it's easier to accept Christ as my Savior and that eternal benefit that I'm going to see, than it is to accept that the money that I've earned and devoting to Him is going to a purpose that is going to benefit others or myself or whatever. So it's, as someone who's very money conscious, and, I do dwell on money quite a bit, it's one of those things that it's a lot harder to step out in faith in that, because it is, it's real. It's very, present present in your life, on a daily basis, like constantly checking bank accounts, making sure we have enough money for food, gas, everything. And, it is a test of faith, in many different scenarios.
Big test of faith. Yep.
So, and that's where that benefit comes from, is because I feel like our faith has increased tenfold just because we've been doing it and relying heavily on the provision that God's blessed us with. So it's hard, even when you've been doing it for a while, it's still occasionally difficult. You're like, it's hard to fight that human element of you.
If I didn't put that 10% in, then
that's
I
X amount of dollars that we would have in our house to do the things we want to do. We can do all those other things that we used to do. Where it's like, learning to live with less is a hard thing to do, and that's where your strength and faith should be focused on. Because if you are stepping out in that faith, it is important to highlight that for yourself. Like, hey, you are taking steps in your walk with Him that prove that you have put your faith in Him in a greater sense.
Last comment. Where did Jesus say we ought to store up our treasure? Because there is that temptation. I'm like, man, if I sent Kristen back to work and we put the kids in school and we didn't homeschool anymore, she'd be able to make but then we're like, no, we want to honor God, and God led us to homeschool, and we want to try to raise up our kids with, the right spiritual foundation. And, so there is that constant temptation to put money first. And God says, money cannot be your master. God's got to be the master. Money's got to be your servant, and you got to see it for what it is. Don't store up treasure here, store up treasure in heaven. Use the resources that He's given you as a slave to you for kingdom purposes. That's what we got to commit to. All right, let's, Carolyn, I'll invite you up, and why don't we rise? So we'll just do the last